Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study through the Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in Genesis chapter 7, and now we're going to get into the Great Flood. There are biblical critics who say that the flood was a local flood and not worldwide, where we're going to see the Bible just refutes that completely. There are people who often try to minimize the power of God, the stories of God. For example, there are people who say that when Israel crossed the Red Sea, that they only crossed on water that was maybe 18 feet deep at best, which even would have been a greater miracle, since the Bible tells us that God not only parted the sea, but He dried the ground. So so anyway, let's get into it. It was He in chapter 6 He commanded Noah to build an ark, a boat. Again, there are people who doubt that, but again, so what? But the ark would sustain Noah and the animals that would then repopulate the earth. Now, someone may ask, well, why didn't God just recreate everything? Why did God just keep, like, for example, Noah and his family and the animals? Well, I don't know. That's the way God decided to do it. He wiped out everything except certain animals. Now, it is interesting that God brought the animals, He summoned the animals, but we'll get into that. Let's get into in chapter 7. So verse 1, it says, Then the Lord said to Noah, Enter the ark, you and all of your household. Now, let's stop a minute. So that would mean 120 years now have come to its end. In chapter 6, you'll remember, God saying that in fact, well, let me see, let me just go back and read it here. So this is chapter 6, Genesis chapter 6, and it says, When mankind began to multiply on the earth, daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful. They took any they choose as wives for themselves. And the Lord said, My spirit will not remain with mankind forever, because they are corrupt. Their days will be 120 years. So that is the pronouncement, judgment pronouncement. We then see He approaches Noah and tells Noah to build an ark, which takes around 100 years, 100 like that. And so now this is where we at in chapter 7. So again, He says, the Lord said to Noah, Enter the ark, you and all of your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Of course, the bar wasn't high for righteousness in this generation. Verse 2, you are to take with you 7 pairs, a male and its female, and all of the clean animals, and 2 of the animals that are not clean, a male and its female, and 7 pairs, male and female, of birds of the sky, in order to keep the offspring alive on the face of the whole earth. Now, one interesting point here that I'm going to mention and then move on. Notice the creation is male and female, not male. Notice not one statement in any way where it says take 2 male birds, 2 female birds, male and female. That is the creation of God. Now, even though I'm not going to engage in the argument or the debate, we're talking about sinful man. So the idea of homosexuality and the gay marriage and all that's a part of the world. But notice from creation, there's no mention, okay, of same sex. That's my point. Verse 4, it says, 7 days from now, I will make it rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And I will wipe off from the face of the earth every living thing I have made. And Noah did everything that the Lord had commanded him. Now it's kind of interesting that this is stated again, and this would become a hallmark of all of the righteous men, that they always do what God has commanded them. That doesn't mean that they were in and of themselves good, righteous, and perfect. But when God told them to do something, they always did it. Verse 6 says, now Noah was 600 years old when the flood came, and the waters covered the earth. So Noah, his sons, his wife, and his son's wife entered the ark because of the waters of the flood. Verse 8, from the clean animals, unclean animals, birds, and every creature that crawls on the ground, 2 of each, male and female, entered the ark of Noah, just as God had commanded them. 7 days later, the waters of the flood came on the earth. So the animals assembled themselves, and again, let me just say this as we move on, because there are people who kind of look at this from their perspective and say, how can such a thing happen? How could Noah had built such a great ark that would have sustained so much life? And remember, food. How could that be? And you remember, God is the one who is orchestrating this. So for example, just getting the animals there, God was the one that brought the animals there. God gave Noah the wisdom and the might, right? The ability to construct the ark, right? So it wasn't that, he just kind of did it on his own, the kind of deism sort of theology where God will say something and disappears. No. So God's ability and might was there to make this happen. The ark was constructed right so that no boards popped off, while they were floating. In other words, so God was the one who preserved by his might, by his power, by his wisdom. Okay, so it wasn't just Noah. Interesting point. It didn't even say that Noah was a shipbuilder. Just a trivial kind of thought there. All right, so verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life. Now remember, God approached him when he was 500 years. And when he was 500 years old, he didn't have his sons until he was 500 years old. So now, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the day all the sources of the watery depths burst open, and floodgates of the sky were open, and the rains fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now, let me just say this because it's very interesting. I get to brag a little bit here because I am a water plant operator for the state of Illinois. I got a Class A water license. So I know a little bit about this because I had to study this in order to get my license. That you see God really disrupting the hydrological cycle, which is what you see in the earth today. The clouds, the underground water, there's a lot of water in the ground, a lot of water. That's why a lot of your towns have well water. They just dig down and start pumping the water up. Well, there is a cycle that you see created by God. The clouds, rain, the rains fall down, and a lot of that water sift into the earth. And of course you have already the oceans, right? That's part of the hydrological cycle. Water evaporates, rains, right? Now in some cases, and we've just seen this with the hurricane and some of the flooding, when the water gets so saturated that you have floods. Okay. Anyway, that's enough for me. I don't get a chance to talk about this, and certainly we can see this is a biblical thing here. I should have brought this up when I took the class, but I do digress. All right. So, let's see. Verse 13, it says, and on that same day, Noah, along with his son Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and we're going to come back to these guys after the flood, because these guys, remember, the earth will be repopulated, right? Noah's wife, his 3 sons' wife, entered the ark with him. They entered it with the wildlife according to their kind, all the livestock according to their kind, the creatures that crawl on the earth according to their kind, all the birds, every fowl, everything with wings according to their kind, to of all flesh that has the breath of life in it, enter the ark with Noah. Those that enter, male and female, of all flesh, enter just as God had commanded them. Then the Lord shut them in. Okay. So you kind of also see the writing style, that sometimes some of the things are repeated, okay, for effect, I think, emphasis. So you see God entering in, and then notice he says that the Lord shut them in, that it was God who shut them in. So God wasn't absent. That's the whole point of even with creation. Now, let me just say this. Even though we don't see God, trust and believe that God is very much active in the affairs of life. But that's a whole other story. But we certainly see here that this came about solely by the sovereignty of God, by the power of God. Okay, so in other words, they just didn't build this. I think there was a silly movie, and a lot of every Hollywood movie, every single one of them fails scripturally when they try to do some kind of biblical story, especially Jesus. But I think there was one about Noah. But remember, it's ungodly people, unchristian people who are writing the scripts on these and telling the story. But as you can see here, God was the one who, again, he was behind everything. So all of the everything that had breath and life in it that lived on the land, he took 2 of every kind into the ark with him. Now again, people will say, do you really believe that? Yes, I really believe this. I really believe the account that God has said. Science has not disproven that at all. The claims, that is, okay? It's not even worth a debate with people, because I would say this: I can't prove or disprove any of the claims of the Bible. Let me be clear, let me say that again. I cannot prove or disprove any claims of the Bible. I believe by faith that the claims of the Bible are true. So that's my stand. Science has not disproven that, and I know that, But anyway, so Noah and all of the animals, and you may say, well, how in the world could they survive and live, and how did, the lions didn't attack, the donkey, and how, other insects, and the smell and everything, how would they kind of exist? Well, here's the thing here, and it's a valid question when you stop and think about life on the ark, right? And as I said, this is a year. This is a year in which Noah is going to be on this ark with all of the animals. All of the animals. So, bears, right? Eagles, lions, hyenas, all of these, slimy animals, what they call it, carnivorous carnivorous animals. Well, why did they not eat one another? Why did they not attack, the humans? Because God commanded them not to. They were under the command of God. That's why. Right? So was the smell unbearable? Was, things unbearable? Who knows? I think God also regulated that as well. That God, made some kind of arrangement, right, for that. And it might not have been the best of things. In other words, this wasn't a cruise ship, right, kind of thing right there that, I'm sure the ark didn't have a swimming pool, didn't have the games, the buffets, but they ate. And God, again, kept them. I think that's the thing. God kept them. All right. So verse 17 says, so the flood continued for 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. The waters surged and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the waters. Then the waters surged even higher on the earth. So this is not just a localized flood, right? And all of the high mountains under the whole sky, notice this, the whole sky, were covered. So this wasn't just a localized, as some people try to say. Not that they can even prove it anyway. Verse 20. The mountains were covered as the water surged above them more than 20 feet. So take the highest mountain that we know of today, and then 20 feet over that's how high the waters went. Every creature perished. Those that crawled on the earth, birds, livestock, wildlife, and those that swarmed on the earth, as well as all mankind. Think about that, all of the people. There's some kind of neat, there are some neat pictures of people pounding on the ark, but by this time they're dead. Notice in verse 22, everything with the breath of the spirit of life in its nostrils, everything on dry land, that would be earth, died. He wiped out every living thing, meaning God. He wiped out every living thing that was on the surface of the ground, from mankind to livestock, the creatures that crawl, to the birds of the sky, and they were wiped off the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. And the waters surged on the earth for 150 days. So we're talking about almost a half a year that just the waters surged, right? Just the waters surged, about a half a year. A half a year. And that would then say that everything that, even if you could swim for that long, right? Even if you try to hold it, right? Eventually, everything died, right? Even if you grab the branch tree or whatever, eventually you would die. And God's judgment. All right, guys, we're going to pick it up at chapter 8, when we come to the end of the flood. But keep this in mind, this is a judgment of God for its wickedness. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next study. All right.